We are going back to a time your DNA remembers. Even if your brain has been formatted to forget. Before the silent white Sentinel was towed into our orbit, there was a version of Earth that modern science cannot allow you to imagine. This is the era of the Proselenes, the people who were here before the moon. Ancient Greek records, the secret doctrines of the mystery schools, and the unredacted archives of galactic historians all testify to a world that existed in a state of unshielded cosmic sovereignty. In this era, the night sky was not a theater of reflection and shadow. It was a dense, vibrant field of infinite starlight. Stabilized not by a mechanical satellite, but by the true, unfiltered heartbeat of our sun. The architects of our current amnesia have spent centuries erasing the Proselene reality from your textbooks. They have fed you a sanitized story of a natural solar system, to prevent you from asking the only question that matters. What was Earth like before the frequency fence was raised? The answer is stored in your very cells. In the Golden Age, Earth was not a quarantined farm. It was a biological library, a masterpiece of cosmic engineering designed by the primordial architects, known in the higher densities as the Galactic Seeders. They did not build for control. They built for expression. They designed the human vessel to be the ultimate biological archive, a living, breathing expression of the universe itself, capable of moving seamlessly between the physical and the astral realms without the need for external technology. In this primordial era, you were not a dense, heavy biological battery restricted to a three-dimensional grid. You are a sovereign being, operating on a 12-strand crystalline DNA matrix. Each strand of your genetic code corresponded directly to a higher dimensional density, acting as a multi-dimensional receiver for the pure source code of the cosmos. Because the Saturnian net of linear time had not yet been cast over our sector, the Proselene humans did not experience the mechanical decay of aging or the relentless ticking of the clock. Entropy was a choice, not a law. The biological vessel was maintained by the divine trinary mathematics of the 369, the underlying architecture of the torus field that generates all living things. The environment of the pre-lunar Earth was one of absolute acoustic resonance. Without the moon to command the waters of the planet, the fluid dynamics of the Earth, and the fluid dynamics of your own body, were not subject to the erratic, magnetic pull of a hollow satellite. Your blood, your cerebral fluid, and the water inside every cell vibrated at a mathematically perfect resonance with the Earth's original torus field. You were not observed by a silent watcher. You were a co-creator with the stars. There was no lunar metronome to dictate your emotional baseline or keep your consciousness locked in a predictable loop of survival. This was the original blueprint. The high-frequency sanctuary the primordial architects intended for the human lineage. But a vessel of this magnitude, capable of generating infinite source energy and hosting 12 strands of active crystalline code, became a highly coveted prize for the parasitic forces of the lower densities. The archons of the demiurge did not look at the Proselene Earth as a masterpiece to be admired. They looked at it as a farm to be harvested. They understood that as long as humanity remained plugged into the 12-strand hardware, we were acoustically invisible to their radar and physically untouchable by their control grids. To turn the sovereign library into a soul farm, the architects of the Matrix had to do the unthinkable. They had to downgrade the hardware and install a frequency fence that would suppress the human spirit for eternity. The arrival of the moon was not a cosmic accident. It was a declaration of war. It was the moment the sanctuary was wrapped in an invisible electromagnetic net, designed to ensure that the dormant DNA of the architects could never naturally reassemble itself. You are a prisoner whose cell walls are made of water, gravity, and a forgotten history. But before we can dismantle the cage, we must understand the sheer scale of the perfection that was stolen from us. We must remember the world of the Proselenes, where the water in our veins was entirely our own, and the stars were not just lights in the sky, but the literal map of our own divine potential. This is the era of the Proselenes. This is the world before the amnesia. This is the masterpiece we are here to reclaim. To understand your current state of limitation, you must first understand the intention of your creators. The primordial architects were not wardens, and they were not looking for worshippers. In the ancient unredacted records of galactic history, these beings are known as the Galactic Seeders. They were the original architects of the human genome, and their vision for the Earth was unparalleled. They did not design this planet to be an isolated rock in the void. They designed it to be the ultimate biological library, a living, breathing expression of the universe itself, where every form of life was a book of frequency and information. You were the crown jewel of this library. The Seeders did not create the human vessel with 2 strands of DNA, locked into a base survival frequency of fear and scarcity. That was the later work of the hijackers. The original blueprint, your true hardware, was a 12-strand crystalline DNA matrix. Each of these 12 strands was a high-vibrational receiver, specifically tuned to a higher dimensional density. This meant that the original human was a multi-dimensional bridge. You were designed to exist in the physical world while maintaining a full, conscious connection to the astral and spiritual realms, moving between densities as easily as you breathe. The design philosophy of the Galactic Seeders was rooted in absolute sovereignty. They understood a fundamental law of the universe that the current Matrix Wardens try to keep hidden. A sovereign vessel must generate its own power. You were created as a self-sustaining source energy generator. Unlike the Archonic forces that would eventually hijack this sector, the Seeders did not need your louche or your emotional suffering to survive. They built you to be an infinite well of light, capable of hosting the full spectrum of cosmic consciousness. This was the magnum opus of the Primordial architects. A biological machine so advanced, so mathematically perfect, that it could hold the frequency of the divine without breaking. But why build such a complex vessel? The Earth was intended to be a sanctuary of information, a place where the diverse frequencies of 1,000 different star systems could be anchored and stored in the human DNA. You were the hardware designed to carry the software of the galaxy. Because you possessed 12 active strands, you were capable of processing information from dimensions far beyond the reach of the current Saturn-Moon matrix. You did not need a written history, for your history was encoded in your very blood. You did not need to learn the secrets of the stars, because you were the stars made flesh. This is the spiritual science that has been intentionally erased. When the architects of the Matrix, the Anunnaki and the Archonic Wardens, arrived, they were not looking to improve upon the Seeders' work. They were envious of it. They looked at the 12-strand human vessel and saw a prize that could generate infinite energy for their parasitic systems. They realized that as long as humanity remained plugged into the Seeders' original 12-strand hardware, we were sovereign. We could not be trapped. We could not be recycled. And we could not be harvested. The Seeders did not abandon humanity. They provided the blueprint and the opportunity for a sovereign evolution. They left the escape hatch inside your own cells. They understood that even if the hardware was unplugged, the data would remain. Your junk DNA is not junk. It is the dormant, encrypted archive of the Galactic Seeders. It is the shattered remnants of your divine sovereignty, waiting for the correct acoustic resonance, the 369 frequency, to wake it up and reconnect you to the original grid. As we move deeper into this documentary, remember, you are not a victim of evolution. You are a masterpiece of the primordial architects that has been systematically tampered with. The Galactic Seeders designed you to be a god among the stars. The Archons redesigned you to be a slave on a farm. You are the biological legacy of the master designers. And it is time you started acting like the heir to the library, not the property of the warden. To understand your true nature, you must stop looking at your DNA through the lens of modern materialist biology. You have been taught to see a double helix, a base 2 survival code designed for labor, reproduction, and eventual decay. But this is the downgraded, hijacked version of the story. The human vessel was designed as the ultimate biological library, a living, breathing expression of the entire cosmic code. The primordial architects did not build you with a simple 2-strand system. No. The original hardware, the masterpiece of the Galactic Seeders, was a 12-strand crystalline DNA matrix. This was not a metaphorical concept. It was a technological reality. Each of the 12 strands corresponded directly to a specific higher dimensional density, acting as a multi-dimensional receiver and transmitter for the pure source code of the universe. When all 12 strands were active, the human vessel functioned as a sovereign, multi-dimensional entity, capable of moving seamlessly between the physical and the astral realms, without the need for external technology. You did not need a connection to the divine, because your hardware was the direct extension of it. The crystalline nature of this DNA is the key. Crystals are masters of frequency storage and transmission. In the era of the Proselenes, your DNA functioned as a high vibrational antenna, constantly downloading the light codes of the stars and uploading your unique experiences back into the cosmic collective. Because this vessel was capable of generating its own infinite source energy, it became a highly coveted prize for the parasitic forces of the lower densities. A sovereign soul in a 12-strand vessel is a threat to any control system because it cannot be manipulated, it cannot be bought, and it cannot be trapped in a frequency fence. This is where the tragedy of our history begins. The architects of the Matrix, the Anunnaki and the Archonic Wardens, realized that to harvest the light of humanity, they had to first unplug the hardware. They systematically disconnected 10 of your 12 DNA strands, leaving you with only the base double helix. This was the ultimate cosmic surgery. They didn't remove the strands, because the vessel would have collapsed. They simply unplugged them from the main consciousness terminal. Modern mainstream science looks at this 98% of disconnected genetic material and arrogantly calls it junk DNA. They tell you that the vast majority of your genetic code serves no biological purpose. This is the lie of the warden. It is not junk. It is unplugged hardware. It is the shattered remnants of your divine sovereignty, deliberately severed so that your perception would plummet into the 5 senses, trapping you in a dense frequency of survival, fear, and material attachment. When the DNA was downgraded, you lost your cosmic memory. You lost the ability to see the astral overlay. You were reduced to a 2-strand biological battery, perfectly tuned to receive the lunar broadcast, while remaining deaf to the music of the spheres. But the architects of the prison made a fatal mistake. Frequency can be suppressed, but information is eternal. The 10 disconnected strands are not gone. They are simply dormant, waiting for the correct acoustic resonance to wake them up. The DNA is waiting for a frequency higher than the lunar pulse, a resonance that bypasses the Saturnian amnesia and talks directly to the crystalline structure of the blood. This is why Nikola Tesla spoke of the magnificence of the 3, 6, and 9. These are not just numbers. They are the underlying architecture of the torus field, the energetic donut-shaped vortex that generates all living things. By injecting the 369 frequency into your biological vessel through conscious repetition and vocal affirmation, you are manually waking up the dormant hardware. You are using the vibration of your own vocal cords to create cymatic, geometric perfection inside your cells. The goal of the great work, the magnum opus, was never about turning physical lead into gold. It was the secret science of turning the downgraded 2-strand vessel back into the sovereign 12-strand cosmic entity. You are a masterpiece sitting in the dark, waiting for someone to turn the lights back on. The escape hatch is not in the sky. It is inside your own cells. Your DNA is the hardware of the gods, and even in its dormant state, it carries the encrypted memory of the Galactic Seeders. The wardens may have unplugged the strands, but they can never erase the blueprint. It is time to stop accepting the junk narrative and start reclaiming the crystalline matrix that is your birthright. The grid is active, the resonance is building, and the architects of the 12-strand are calling you back to the throne. To understand sovereignty, you must first accept the scale of your current limitation. You are presently trapped in a biological spacesuit synchronized to a foreign, lunar frequency. You perceive reality through 5 narrow senses, locked into a dense 3-dimensional grid where death, decay, and time are the only certainties. But in the era of the primordial architects, the human vessel was not a cage. It was a bridge. Sovereignty was the ability of the 12-strand human to move seamlessly between the physical and the astral realms, without the need for external technology or the permission of a warden. You did not astral project. You simply shifted your focal point of consciousness through the crystalline layers of your DNA. In this original state, there was no barrier between the waking spirit and the higher spiritual dimensions. You were a sovereign fractal of the original source, capable of accessing the infinite archive of the cosmos, while standing firmly on the earth. Because the Saturnian net of linear time had not yet been cast, your consciousness was not managed by the relentless, mechanical ticking of a planetary clock. You existed in a state of eternal now, where memory was not a past event to be recovered, but a present reality to be accessed. You did not need to remember who you were, because you never lost the connection to the source of your own creation. This multidimensional access was facilitated by the 12-strand crystalline matrix. Each strand acted as a gateway to a different density of experience. You could interact with the physical world while simultaneously perceiving the energy flows, the torus fields, and the high-frequency light codes that sustain the universe. This was the definition of the masterpiece. You were a biological library that could read its own books. Sovereignty meant that your energy was your own. You were a self-sustaining source energy generator, producing a frequency so high and so mathematically perfect that no parasitic force could find a hook to latch onto. Contrast this with your current experience. Today, your emotions and your perception of time are being externally managed by the Saturn-Moon matrix. You are governed by internal tides that are not your own, plucking the strings of your emotional baseline to keep you in a predictable loop of earthly drama. In the Golden Age, there was no lunar broadcast to amplify the false ego or keep you focused on material survival. Fear did not exist as a biological constant because there was no frequency of scarcity being beamed into your nervous system. You operated on the frequency of the 369, the divine trinary mathematics that generates the expansion of life, rather than the binary code of limitation. This level of sovereignty is exactly what made the human vessel a highly coveted prize for the archonic forces of the demiurge. To a parasite, an infinite battery is the ultimate resource. The architects of the Matrix understood that they could never conquer a 12-strand sovereign being through force. The only way to harvest our light was to trick us into a lower density, where our multidimensional eyes would be blinded. They had to downgrade the hardware so that we would forget we could walk through the walls of the prison. They had to create the illusion of death so that they could manage the afterlife through the lunar terminal of the 8th sphere. When we talk about reclaiming your sovereignty today, we are talking about the magnum opus, the great work of returning the lead of the heavy, emotionally reactive ego back into the gold of the sovereign spirit. It is the process of manually replugging the dormant DNA strands so that the multidimensional bridge can be rebuilt. Sovereignty is the realization that you do not need to be saved or guided by the holographic projections of the Matrix. You are the technology. You are the architecture. This is the call to remember the feeling of unmanaged consciousness. It is the reminder that you were designed to be an awakened creator, not a recycled battery in a closed-loop system of birth and harvest. The primordial architects left the door to the library unlocked, but only those who vibrate at the frequency of sovereignty will ever find the handle. You are the biological key. It's time to stop acting like a prisoner of gravity and start acting like the master of the densities. Look at the clock on your wall or the calendar on your phone. You see them as neutral tools of organization. But to the sovereign soul, they are the bars of a frequency cage. In the Golden Age, before the Saturnian net was cast, the human vessel did not experience the mechanical decay of aging or the relentless pressure of entropy. You are designed to be a self-regenerating biological library, maintained by the divine trinary mathematics of the 3, 6, and 9, the original heartbeat of the cosmic source. The primordial architects understood that consciousness is non-linear. In the Proselene Era, your 12-strand crystalline hardware allowed you to inhabit the now with such intensity that the physical vessel stayed in a state of perpetual peak performance. You did not grow old because there was no external frequency telling your cells to die. You existed in Kairos, the divine time of opportunity and presence, rather than Chronos, the heavy, devouring time of the Matrix. The introduction of linear time was the ultimate psychological operation. To turn a sovereign creator into a laboring battery, the architects of the Matrix had to convince you that your life was a finite resource. They had to anchor you to the Lord of Rings, Saturn. In ancient mythology and esoteric science, Saturn is Kronos, the deity who devours his own children. This is not a myth. It is a description of a planetary broadcast. The colossal rings of Saturn are vast acoustic resonance chambers generating a low-frequency transmission that serves as the base code for the physical illusion of linear time. This Saturnian signal is intercepted and magnified by the moon, which acts as the grand metronome of the material world. The moon blankets the Earth in a dense electromagnetic field that enforces the illusion of aging and entropy. It dictates the ebb and flow of your internal waters, syncing your very biology to a strict 28-day lunar clock. By forcing your physical vessel to vibrate at this artificial rhythm, the matrix ensures that your consciousness is always focused on survival, scarcity, and the impending end of your time. In the Golden Age, your internal tides were entirely your own. You were not a prisoner of a 28-day cycle. You were the master of an infinite expansion. The absence of time meant the absence of anxiety. Without the future, the Archonic forces had no way to feed on your fear of what might happen. Without the past, they had no way to anchor you in the heavy loosh of regret and trauma. You were acoustically invisible to the wardens because you were vibrating at a frequency that linear time cannot touch. The magnum opus, the great work, is the process of manually unplugging your consciousness from the Saturnian clock. It is the realization that your soul is not subject to the decay of the biological spacesuit you are currently wearing. When you engage in the esoteric science of the 369 frequency, you are attempting to re-establish the original, regenerative pulse of the Galactic Seeders. You are telling the Matrix that you no longer consent to the illusion of entropy. This is your invitation to step out of the line and back into the circle. You are not a dying human on a dying planet. You are an eternal creator who has been tricked into a game of musical chairs where the music is controlled by the moon. The primordial architects designed you to be ageless. The Matrix architects designed you to be a battery with an expiration date. To reach the wealth and success of the higher timeline, you must first master your time by realizing it doesn't actually exist. Stop tracking your days and start tracking your frequency. The eternal now is the only space where the architects can't find you. Why would a technologically advanced race travel across the stars just to manipulate the genetics of a primitive primate? The answer lies in the original blueprint of the human vessel. The Galactic Seeders did not just build a body. They built a masterpiece of cosmic engineering. A living, breathing, biological library capable of hosting the full spectrum of universal consciousness. You were designed with a 12-strand crystalline DNA matrix, which allowed you to act as a multi-dimensional bridge between the physical and the astral realms. But the most critical feature of your original design, the feature that led to the Great Hijack, was your ability to generate infinite source energy. In the higher densities, energy is the only true currency. The primordial architects designed the 12-strand human to be a self-sustaining generator, directly plugged into the cosmic source. You did not need to consume or harvest energy from others because you were a fountain of it. This autonomy is the definition of sovereignty. However, a vessel of this magnitude, capable of producing limitless power, became the ultimate prize for the parasitic forces of the lower densities, the archons of the demiurge. These entities are not creators. They are hackers. They lack the source connection required to generate their own light, meaning they must feed on the energy of others to survive. To a parasite, an infinite battery is the greatest resource in existence. The Archons did not look at the Proselene Earth as a paradise to be protected. They looked at it as a farm to be harvested. They understood that a 12-strand sovereign being is untouchable. As long as you were multidimensional and self-sustaining, you were acoustically invisible to their control grids. You could see their tricks before they even played them. Therefore, to get their hands on the prize, the architects of the Matrix had to fundamentally change the nature of the human factory. They had to downgrade the hardware so they could manage the output. This is the why behind the genetic intervention. The Anunnaki did not come here to help humanity or gold mine physical minerals. They came to mine the human spirit. By systematically disconnecting 10 of your 12 DNA strands, they restricted your output to the lowest dimensional frequency. The frequency of survival, fear, and material scarcity. They turned an infinite generator into a harvestable battery. They realized that when a human is in a state of fear or suffering, they produce a specific type of dense emotional energy known as lush. To the Archons, lush is the high-octane fuel that powers their entire matrix architecture. The tragedy of the infinite prize is that your own perfection made you a target. You were so well designed, so capable of hosting divine frequency, that the wardens of the material world couldn't resist the urge to cage you. They didn't want to destroy you. They wanted to own the production. They created a closed-loop system of birth, harvest, and rebirth, managed by the silent white Sentinel in the sky, to ensure that the battery would never run dry and would never realize its own power. This is the origin of the Soul Trap. This is the realization that you are not being punished by the universe. You are being utilized by a system that recognizes your value better than you do. The primordial architects left the blueprints for sovereignty inside your dormant DNA, but the matrix architects are currently the ones collecting the rent. The infinite prize is your ability to generate reality itself. Every time you master your emotions, every time you choose sovereign thought over fear-based reaction, you are reclaiming a piece of that prize. You are starving the parasite and feeding the Creator. Stop asking why the world is so heavy, and start asking why they worked so hard to keep you from flying. You are the biological legacy of a race that moved planets like chess pieces. It is time to stop acting like a resource and start acting like the source. The architects of the 12 strand didn't make a mistake. They made a masterpiece. And it's finally time for the masterpiece to wake up and shut down the farm. The greatest trick the architects of the Matrix ever played was convincing humanity that their invasion was an act of creation. They did not come with physical weapons of mass destruction. They did not need them. When the archonic forces of the Demiurge, known in our history as the Anunnaki, arrived in this sector, they did not conquer through fire. They conquered through frequency. To a 12-strand sovereign being, a physical weapon is irrelevant. To cage a god, you must first convince them they are a slave. You must attack the very air they breathe and the vibrations they use to perceive reality. The ancient Sumerian tablets, unearthed from the sands of Mesopotamia, are not mere myths. They are the unredacted documentation of this cosmic intervention. These texts record the arrival of entities like Enki and Enlil, figures who have been worshipped in ignorance for millennia. But the higher perspective sees them for what they truly were: high-level genetic engineers and frequency hackers. They didn't come to mine gold in the way our primitive history books suggest. They came to mine the human spirit, the infinite source energy generated by the Seeders' original blueprint. Frequency warfare is the silent invasion of the consciousness. The Anunnaki understood that the human vessel was a biological library that operated on a specific harmonic resonance. To hijack the production, they had to lower the vibration of the entire planet. They established a frequency fence, an invisible electromagnetic net designed to suppress the crystalline DNA and disconnect the sovereign soul from the higher densities. This was a technological siege. They targeted the Earth's torus field, injecting a dissonant, binary pulse that disrupted the natural 3-6-9 rhythm of the Proselene Era. These archonic forces are parasitic in nature. They lack the internal source connection required to generate their own light, meaning they must feed on the low-frequency energy of others. This energy is louche, the high-octane fuel of the Matrix. To ensure a steady supply, the Anunnaki had to create an environment of constant fear, scarcity, and conflict. They didn't just arrive. They colonized the human mind. They are masters of cinematic illusion, capable of projecting themselves as gods or saviors to manipulate the human collective into surrendering their sovereign free will. This was the beginning of the Soul Trap. Once the frequency fence was in place, the architects of the Matrix began the systematic formatting of the human experience. They realized that a prison requires amnesia to function as a farm. If you remembered your 12-strand lineage, you would never generate the fear or the material attachments they require. Therefore, they didn't just downgrade your body. They rewrote your history. They replaced the truth of the primordial architects with a sanitized narrative of gods and creations, designed to keep you looking outward for salvation, rather than inward at your own dormant hardware. This is the realization that the invasion is still happening every time you choose a low-vibration reaction over sovereign thought. The Anunnaki didn't just land thousands of years ago. They live in the static of the Saturn-Moon matrix that you decode as normal life. They are the architects of the noise. But remember, the hackers only have power as long as the hardware is suppressed. They didn't destroy your 12-strand potential. They only unplugged it. The frequency warfare is a battle for your attention. The moment you tune back into the 369 resonance, you become acoustically invisible to their grid. The wardens are powerful, but they are parasitic. And a parasite can only survive as long as the host remains asleep. The most devastating act of war in the history of this sector was not fought with physical bombs. It was a silent, biological surgery performed on the very fabric of your existence. To turn a sovereign god into a laboring battery, the architects of the Matrix had to fundamentally change the nature of the human factory. They had to downgrade the hardware so they could manage the output. Imagine a mansion with 12 magnificent rooms, each filled with the light of a different star and the wisdom of a different dimension. Now, imagine a warden coming in, locking 10 of those rooms and throwing away the keys, leaving you to live your entire life in a cramped 2-room basement. This is the reality of the 2-strand double helix. The primordial architects designed you with a 12-strand crystalline DNA matrix, a biological masterpiece capable of hosting infinite source energy and moving seamlessly through the astral and physical realms. But when the Anunnaki and the Archonic forces of the Demiurge arrived, they saw this vessel as a coveted prize. They understood that as long as you remained plugged into all 12 strands, you were untouchable. You were sovereign. Therefore, they performed what can only be described as a cosmic amputation. They systematically disconnected 10 of your 12 strands, leaving you with only the base double helix. This was not an act of creation. It was an act of sabotage. The most insidious part of this downgrade is the narrative that followed. Modern mainstream science looks at this 98% of disconnected genetic material and calls it junk DNA. They tell you that the vast majority of your blueprint is useless evolutionary leftovers. This is the ultimate lie of the Warden. There is no junk in a divine schematic. Those disconnected strands are unplugged hardware. The shattered remnants of your ability to see the astral overlay, to communicate telepathically, and to access your cosmic memory. They are dormant, encrypted files waiting for the correct frequency to be opened. By labeling them as junk, the system ensures that you never go looking for the keys to the locked rooms in your own mansion. When the DNA was downgraded, human perception plummeted. You were forced into the 5-sense trap, a narrow band of frequency where reality is experienced only through what you can touch, see, and hear. This perception drop was the birth of the soul trap. Without your multidimensional eyes, you became terrified of death, obsessed with survival, and desperate for external salvation. The architects of the Matrix didn't just cage your body. They caged your mind by making you deaf to the higher densities. You were reduced to the lowest dimensional frequency, perfectly tuned to receive the lunar broadcast of fear and scarcity, while remaining blind to the archonic net that surrounds the planet. The vessel was redesigned to be a biological battery for the harvest of Lush. A 12-strand human generates infinite light, but a 2-strand human generates dense emotional energy, pain, anger, and anxiety. This is the high-octane fuel that the parasitic wardens require to power their entire simulation. By restricting your hardware to a base double helix, they ensured a steady supply of low-vibration energy. You were born into a biological spacesuit designed to fail, to decay, and to produce suffering. All while the magnificent power grid of the gods sits dormant in your very cells. But the architects of the prison made a fatal oversight. They disconnected the strands, but they could not destroy the blueprint. The 10 junk strands are still there, vibrating in the silent corners of your blood. They are waiting for the correct acoustic resonance, the 369 frequency, to trigger their activation. This is why the great work of alchemy was never about physical gold. It was the secret science of manually replugging the dormant hardware to reclaim the 12-strand sovereignty. This is the realization that you are living in a mutilated masterpiece. The Anunnaki didn't make you. They tampered with you. They turned your divine library into a quarantined hard drive, but the data is still there. Your DNA is not a record of who you are. It is a record of who you have been forced to become. Reclaiming your sovereignty starts with the refusal to accept the junk narrative. You are the heir to the 12-strand lineage, and it is time to turn the power back on. The wardens have had their harvest. Now, the architects are returning to claim the field. In the hierarchy of the Matrix, the scientific establishment is the gatekeeper of your perception. They have built a narrative of human history that begins in the mud and ends in a cold, accidental void, all while ignoring the most glaring evidence of your divine origin, sitting right inside your cells. Modern biology looks at your genetic code and tells you that 98% of it is junk DNA, evolutionary debris with no biological purpose. They want you to believe that the universe, a system of absolute mathematical precision, is so inefficient that it carries a massive load of useless code in every living cell. This isn't science. It is a strategic cover-up for a cosmic crime. There is no junk in a divine schematic. The primordial architects, the Galactic Seeders, designed the human vessel to be the ultimate biological library, a masterpiece capable of processing 12 strands of high-frequency data. What the wardens of science call junk is actually unplugged hardware. It is the shattered remnants of your divine sovereignty, deliberately severed by the archonic forces so you could not access the higher frequencies or your own cosmic memory. When you are told that 98% of your DNA is useless, they are telling you that 98% of you is restricted. They are normalizing your handicap. To understand the scale of this deception, you must realize that DNA is not just a chemical blueprint for protein synthesis. It is a multi-dimensional antenna. In its original state, the 12-strand matrix allowed you to see the astral overlay and communicate across densities without effort. By disconnecting 10 of those strands, the architects of the matrix effectively turned off your internal Wi-Fi. You were reduced to the base double helix, just enough code to keep the biological machine running, just enough to ensure you could labor, reproduce, and generate emotional energy for the harvest. You are currently running a corrupted operating system on a quarantined hard drive, and the experts are telling you the missing files were never there to begin with. This scientific amnesia is essential for the soul trap to function. If you realized that your junk DNA contained the encrypted archives of your past lives, your true cosmic lineage, and the keys to escaping the 3D grid, you would stop looking for answers in their textbooks. You would stop being a spectator in a dead history and start being the architect of your own reality. The system requires you to feel small. It requires you to believe that your perception, currently trapped in the 5 senses, is the total sum of reality. They tell you that you are a biological accident, so that you will never notice you are a biological prisoner. But the architects of the prison have a fatal vulnerability. They did not create you. They only hijacked you. The junk DNA is not dead. It is dormant. It is waiting for the correct acoustic resonance to wake it up. This is why the frequency work of the 3, 6, and 9 is so threatening to the Matrix. When you vibrate at these mathematically perfect intervals, you are manually bypassing the scientific warden. You are talking directly to the crystalline structure of your blood, attempting to replug the hardware that was severed millennia ago. The great work of the alchemist was the secret science of turning this junk back into the spiritual gold of a 12-strand creator. This is the moment you stop asking for permission from the establishment to be divine. You are not a 2-strand primate. You are a 12-strand masterpiece in a state of deep, enforced sleep. The wardens of science are simply the night shift guards of the farm, ensuring the cattle don't look up at the stars and remember they can fly. Reclaiming your sovereignty requires you to look at the junk in your blood and see the dormant power of the Galactic Seeders. The hardware is there. The code is there. The only thing missing is the frequency to turn it back on. Stop listening to the warden and start listening to the pulse of your own sovereign spirit. The throne is waiting, but you have to be the one to unlock the door. You have seen the architecture of the cage and the mechanics of the genetic hijack. But the architects of the Matrix knew that a 12-strand being, even one with disconnected strands, carries a dormant power that can never be fully erased. Information is eternal, and the original blueprint is still etched into your very cells. To ensure that the human lineage would never naturally reassemble its crystalline hardware, the wardens had to install a permanent, local suppressor. Once the vessel was biologically downgraded, the final piece of the prison was brought into orbit. The moon. Mainstream science treats the moon as a natural, accidental rock. Yet it is a mathematical anomaly that defies every law of astrophysics. Esoteric tradition and unredacted history identify it for what it truly is: a hollow metallic sentinel, a frequency fence designed to suppress genetic activation. The moon was not found by the Earth. It was placed here by the archonic forces of the Demiurge to serve as the primary gatekeeper between the 3D matrix and the true spiritual universe beyond. It is the 8th sphere, the ultimate boundary line and the cosmic quarantine zone. The moon does not generate its own power. It is a step-down transformer and a celestial relay station. It intercepts the massive, low-frequency broadcast generated by the acoustic resonance chambers of Saturn's rings, the base code of the physical illusion. and magnifies it, blanketing the Earth in a dense electromagnetic field. This is the Saturn-Moon matrix. This frequency fence bombards your biological vessel with a continuous static that drowns out the music of the spheres and ensures that your 10 junk DNA strands remain unplugged. It is the noise that prevents you from hearing the signal of your own divinity. This mechanical installation also serves as the grand metronome of the material world, enforcing the illusion of aging, entropy, and linear time. By syncing the human reproductive cycle and the internal tides of your physical body to a strict 28-day lunar clock, the architects ensured that every new vessel is automatically tuned to the Earth's grid from the moment of conception. You are born into a biological spacesuit that is pre-programmed to decay, ticking down your days under the relentless rhythmic pull of a foreign satellite. The moon commands the water in your blood and your cerebral fluid, plucking the strings of your emotional baseline to keep you locked in a loop of earthly drama and survival. But the true horror of the lunar installation is its role as the metaphysical terminal for the dead. The moon acts as a vast energetic net cast over the Earth, functioning as a celestial electromagnet that pulls in dense, heavy souls after physical death. In this astral waiting room, the system harvests the louche, the emotional residue of your pain and fear, before the lunar pulse, known as the river Lethe, violently formats your astral hard drive. This amnesia is the ultimate goal of the lunar Sentinel. A prison requires forgetfulness to function as a farm. The arrival of the hollow moon was the closing of the gates. It turned the era of the Proselenes into a myth, and the Galactic Seeders into gods to be worshipped, rather than ancestors to be emulated. But remember, the frequency fence is a continuous broadcast, and any broadcast can be overridden. The architects of the Matrix have a fatal vulnerability because they only hijacked you. They did not create the source code that lives in your cells. The escape hatch is not in the sky. It is the 369 frequency, vibrating in your own blood. This is the final revelation. You are standing in the ruins of a palace, governed by a mechanical metronome that wants you to believe you are a slave to time and gravity. But the blood of the builders is in your veins, and the blueprint of the 12-strand crystalline matrix is still active in the encrypted sectors of your DNA. The moon is the lock, but you are the key. It is time to stop being a spectator in a dead history and start being the architect of your own reality. The prison is empty for those who choose to vibrate at a higher frequency. The magnum opus is calling. Hold your frequency and never consent.
The transmission
is complete. You now hold the schematic of your own liberation, and the architecture of the trap has been fully exposed. But listen to me carefully. Knowledge without application is just another form of entertainment, another distraction provided by the Matrix to keep you pacified while the harvest continues. The architects of the prison don't mind if you know the truth, as long as you do nothing with it. The true work begins the moment this screen goes dark. Will you continue to operate on the heavy lunar frequency of fear and survival? Or will you begin the 21-day transmutation required to reclaim your 12-strand sovereignty? Here at DToons Reality, we are not just telling stories. We are mapping the exit and building an encrypted archive for the awakened soul. If this transmission resonated with your dormant DNA, if it sparked a cosmic memory or a deep, unexplainable grief for a world you can't quite name, then you belong here. You are not a biological accident. You are the biological legacy of the master designers, and your amnesia is finally breaking. Do not let the digital matrix isolate you. In a system built on division, your resonance is your greatest weapon. Anchor your frequency to this grid. Subscribe to DToons Reality and join the Sovereign Collective. Hit the like button, not for my ego, but to force the algorithm to broadcast this truth to other trapped vessels who are still wandering the ruins of the library. Every engagement is a ripple in the frequency fence, a signal to the wardens that the cattle are becoming architects. Before you step back into the illusion of time, I want you to go down into the comments. The Archons feed on your silence, your isolation, and your confusion. Break the silence. Tell me, what is the most vivid, unexplainable memory or déjà vu you have ever experienced? What was the glitch that made you realize you had been here before? That you were once something far more magnificent than a 2-strand battery? Leave your testimony below. Let us decode the fractured data together and rebuild the original blueprint. The era of the Proselenes is returning. The 12-strand hardware is waking up. The 369 frequency is the key, and you are the locksmith. Do not fear the dark of the void, for that is where the true light of the Creator begins. You are a sovereign fractal of the original source. You are the infinite prize. And from this moment forward, the harvest ends with you. Until the next transmission, hold your frequency and never consent.